I used to think I was just being funny. That night, surrounded by friends, laughter, and half-empty glasses at Half Oak, I thought I'd lighten the mood with a little joke. I said my body count was probably higher than everyone else's combined. People laughed, but not really. It was that kind of awkward laugh people use when they don't know if they're supposed to. Callum didn't laugh at all. He just stared at me, quiet and unreadable, then gently set down his fork. I teased him, told him to relax, that it was just a joke. Still nothing. The silence stretched until I started talking more, filling the air with nervous words about men being too sensitive. When the check came, he stood, left money on the table, and walked out. Everyone watched me, their faces frozen. I forced a smirk and said he just couldn't handle a confident woman. At home, he didn't argue or ask for an explanation. He calmly packed a small bag and said he'd stay at his mother's for a few days. I told him he was overreacting. He looked at me and said, "You think it's funny because you're never the one being laughed at." Then he left. The next morning, his mug was gone. His wedding ring sat on the counter. I laughed when I saw it, until I realized my hands were shaking. The house felt hollow, too quiet, too clean. I told myself he'd cool off and come home soon. At work, I told the story like it was something out of a sitcom. A few people chuckled, but one woman said her husband would have left too. I brushed it off, saying men these days just couldn't handle honesty. Deep down, though, something inside me twisted. That night, when I called him, his mother texted instead, asking me to stop reaching out until he was ready. That stung. I vented to my mom, who told me not to apologize for having a sense of humor. She said he'd come back once he realized how silly he was being. A few days later, I went to the house to grab some papers. His office door was half open, and on the desk was a neat stack of printed emails, from a law firm called Grant & Foster LLP. My stomach dropped. I took a photo but told myself I was imagining things. That night, I messaged him saying we needed to talk. Hours later, he replied, "There's nothing left to discuss." I stared at those words until my phone screen went dark, realizing he might really mean it. A week passed. A mutual friend invited both of us to her birthday dinner. I decided to go, convinced he wouldn't dare make a scene. When he arrived, calm and composed, I felt a strange sort of pride, like I could still get under his skin. The conversation turned light again, and I couldn't resist. I made another joke about having more experience than anyone else there. The laughter didn't come this time. Just silence. Callum looked at me and said quietly, "That explains a lot." My smile faltered. I accused him of trying to humiliate me, and he said, "You do that well enough on your own." Then he reached into his jacket, placed an envelope beside my plate, and said, "You like attention? Here's something worth talking about." He walked out without another word. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were divorce papers, dated 2 weeks before that first dinner. He'd already made up his mind before I even told the joke. Everyone at the table pretended not to notice as I forced a smile and muttered that he'd calm down eventually. But driving home that night, I realized he wasn't coming back. Later, when I tried to laugh, the sound came out wrong, strained, artificial, nothing like me. After that night, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. The papers. He'd already had them printed, waiting, as if all he'd needed was an excuse. I kept telling myself he wouldn't actually go through with it, that once he saw me trying, he'd let it go. I sent him long messages, about love, about misunderstanding, about how jokes can hurt but don't mean anything. He never replied. One afternoon, I went back to the house to collect a few things. His study door was locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key. Inside, everything was unnervingly tidy. Folders lined up in perfect order, each neatly labeled in his familiar handwriting: finances, messages, custody. I opened one and froze. Screenshots of my social media posts, texts, comments from friends about how wild I used to be before marriage. Another folder held receipts and bank transfers, annotated in red, misuse of shared funds. Each page felt like a quiet accusation. I sat in his chair and whispered to the empty room that he'd gone too far. But as I flipped through more pages, I realized this hadn't been sudden. He'd been documenting everything for months, maybe longer, building a case, detail by detail, while I thought we were just arguing. When he came home later, I confronted him. He didn't shout. He just told me to lock up when I was done. I asked if he was really doing this. He said, "You already did," and went upstairs, calm as ever, as if nothing had shattered. 2 weeks later, we sat across from each other at mediation. I wore a navy dress, simple and steady-looking, hoping it made me seem composed. Callum was already there with his lawyer, looking well-rested, almost peaceful. I smiled at him, expecting some flicker of recognition, but he didn't even look at me. The mediator asked who wanted to begin. I said I would. I explained that everything had been blown out of proportion, that it was just a joke that landed badly, that Callum had turned humor into punishment. His lawyer opened a folder. Inside were printed pages, screenshots, statements, messages between me and Blake from years ago. My stomach twisted. I said it didn't mean anything. The lawyer replied that it showed a pattern of public disrespect. Callum sat in silence the entire time. When the mediator asked if he had anything to say, he just said quietly, "I'm only here for closure." I tried to take control again. I said men like him couldn't handle confident women, that I'd never cheated. The mediator glanced up and said gently, "No one said you did." Somehow that cut deeper than anything else. When the summary was read, it was final. Property and custody awarded to Callum. Immediate separation. My throat tightened. I looked at him, hoping for some trace of mercy, but he only nodded, thanked the mediator, and turned to me. "You wanted everyone to laugh," he said. "Now they have their ending." Then he walked out. When I returned home, the house felt hollow. His things were gone, drawers emptied, closets half open, his scent fading from the air. On the kitchen table sat a thick envelope with my name on it. Inside were the final papers, neatly stamped. I'd expected a note, some emotion, maybe anger. There was nothing, just black ink and the end of us. I called my mother. She said she was sorry, but maybe this time I'd gone too far. I told her it was just honesty, that humor shouldn't destroy a marriage. She said, it wasn't humor. It was cruelty pretending to be. I hung up before she could continue. For a long while, I walked through the quiet house touching the remnants he'd left behind. A chipped mug, a lone sock, our son's old drawing still pinned to the fridge. The silence hurt more than any argument ever had. "It was just a joke," I whispered, as if saying it again could rewrite the truth. But the room stayed still. That night, I sat in his chair, staring at the empty space where his computer used to be. I thought about how calm he'd been, how certain. He never tried to destroy me. He just waited, patient and silent, while I did it myself, one careless word at a time. I laughed once, but it came out weak. I told myself he'd regret it someday, that he'd miss me. But deep down, I already knew. He'd stopped hearing my voice long before he walked out the door.